So welcome, and today we're visiting with Dr. Kovin Naidoo, who is our lecturer this evening for the Myers Lecture, the fourth Myers Lecture, and we're just taking some time to interview you and visit with you a little bit and learn a little bit about what makes you tick and all that kind of stuff. So with that, we've got multiple pages of questions to go through. But I do have some thoughts and everything. So first of all, it's a privilege to have you here and be the Myers guest lecturer. We're very excited about that. A lot of achievements in your life, and I just want to highlight a few of those. Founder and the CEO of the African Vision and Research Institute, Associate Professor of Optometry at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, a Global Programs Director at the Brian Holden Vision Institute, a co-author of the Comprehensive Optometric Reference. Thus far, you've guided the establishment of, I think, 3 optometry schools on the African continent, a variety of committees as an expert for the World Health Organization. I've been recognized by the American Academy of Optometry with the S4 Award for Outstanding International Contributions to Optometry, by the Schwab Foundation as a Social Entrepreneur Award for Africa, Honorary Fellow of the British College of Optometrists, and a Shoko Fellow for Social Entrepreneurship, African Optometrist of the Year in 2002, and the International Optometrist of the Year in 2007, which is a pretty impressive list of stuff, particularly for a fellow that's not yet 50 years of age. So we're pretty excited about that. But we want to know a little bit more about you, and as I said, what really makes you tick. So as I was kind of studying a little bit about you, I found out that you were involved in karate as a child. Is that right? So is that still part of your life, or has that disappeared, or where's that at?
I learned very quickly that the capacity to be effective in karate is linked to your growth, and I need to get out when I was ahead of the game. So when the others were getting bigger and I was not, I just decided this is it for me. So I left on a very, very high note. Let me put it that way.
As I understand, you had provincial honors, and does that mean we won in the province, or help us understand?
Yeah, I won. The province is like a state, and the karate I did was full contact, and I won that tournament. And again, it was a lot about reflexes and speed and not growth. But actually, seriously, the main reason I left karate was I got expelled from high school. And I was leading a student protest at our school against the celebration of Republic Day, which was an Apartheid Day celebration. And when I got expelled, I had to go for night classes. So because of that, I quit karate.
And talk to us a little bit about that. First of all, for those who don't fully understand what apartheid means, tell us a little bit about that, just kind of define it for us, and then tell us a little bit about some of your activism work and what kinds of things you were involved with in that.
Well, apartheid was probably one of the best, or worst rather, social engineering in modern times around race, where different race groups were kept separate and unequal. My forefathers 150 years ago went to South Africa from India, and when they first arrived, they interacted with all the race groups, especially the Zulu population in KwaZulu-Natal where we live. But apartheid separated them, almost tried to get you to feel that you were superior to people of African origin and that you were inferior to people of European origin. So that was my reality. We were somewhere in the middle. And it was a very clever system that was designed to keep us apart, but also ensure that you got a little bit more than the person of African origin and much less than the person who was of European origin, so that you actually kept groups away from wanting to be involved in a unified struggle. So the apartheid system was around socioeconomic rights, education, deprivation, and basically simple things like the beach that I go to regularly now, I couldn't go to as a kid.
And then what kind of activism did you do? And you say you got kicked out of high school in part for this, but I think it kind of carried on beyond that, did it not?
Yeah, well, my mom in particular was very religious, and she always said it's how you live your religion, not how much you pray that really matters. And for my brother and I, he's currently the CEO of Greenpeace International. The both of us were 1 year difference between us. We kind of started engaging each other and talking about what does this mean for us. When we were 12, 13 at that point. But I think it was an advantage to have a sibling who was also curious about these issues. And we then concluded that part of what we should be doing is opposing racism. Because if you wanted to be good, and if you read the scriptures, they often say, much of the scriptures talk about good against evil. You know, the triumph of good against evil. And in our context, there was much of this oppression occurring, and we should stand up against it. The first thing was to get even our own families and our own friends to accept that they were no more better than anybody else. And then to work with the majority population to be able to oppose apartheid. And that's what we did. So I led together with my brother, led the school boycotts at that time in 1981, and we were rewarded by being expelled. So that happened. But we won a court case, and they allowed us to write the exams, but they didn't allow me back into school. They just said 1 year away from you would be good for the rest of the students. And so as a result, they allowed me to get back the following year. We did pass, studied at home and passed. So that was really what happened. And I think, just to say that, I think it was difficult for even the state at that point, because they tried to drive a rift between us and the rest of the students to make us sound as these two irresponsible brothers. It was very difficult because we both were top students in our classes, you know. And so we're really driven by not a political history. Neither were we a poor family. We were one of the families that my father was a bookkeeper, so we had enough. We're not rich, but we had enough. We were not driven by personal poverty. But I think we are driven by moral and ethical and religious beliefs that said you should take a stand against it.
And that's an interesting background and backdrop for the life. As I study, I find out that you have 5 college degrees, 2 from South Africa, 1 from Australia, and then 2 from here in the United States. So we've got 5 college degrees from 3 different continents. You were a Fulbright Scholar, which was designed as a program for exchange of ideas internationally, both from Americans going abroad to study and foreigners coming to the United States to study. Tell a little bit about how that all, why do we end up going to 3 continents to get educated, I guess is kind of interesting. But how did that all work together, or how did it all happen, and why?
Well, maybe embarrassingly, optometry was not my first choice. I wanted to do medicine. And I got a place, I was going to leave the province and go to Johannesburg to study medicine. But in those days, the political activists at the university collectively took decisions. And the collective decision was, you will not go. So as a result of that, I had to find an alternative, and optometry was the second choice. But it's the best decision that somebody else had made for me in my life. I still see a lot of my friends from that period. Some of them are government ministers and all, and I always say to them, they say, you're doing great in your profession. I said, no, I'm doing great because you guys took the decision. If I took it, I'd probably just be an average doctor now or doing something else. So that was the background to that. And then part of being an activist was you obviously studied very little, But I also learned some of inadequacies in apartheid education, because even though I studied little, you could beat the system and get decent grades. But I knew very little. And I knew that when I graduated that I didn't know as much as I needed to know in optometry. I wasn't the kind of clinician I wanted to be. And so therefore I applied for the Fulbright to come and study here. And it was great. It was the first time I knew at 8 o'clock in the morning I will be in a lecture. In South Africa as a student, I'd spend probably 3 months in a year being on the run, go underground, miss lectures, police would be looking for me. Then when things get cool, come back and then start trying to catch up with work. So it was not an easy type of environment to study. But when I applied here, I applied for a master's in community optometry. And then I learned there was no such course in the US at that time. I'd assumed, and it's an indictment of our profession globally at that point, that there must be something of that sort, So I had various options, but Dr. Lou Catania from PCO was very aggressive about getting me to go there. And he negotiated with Temple University for me to do a master's in public health in the evenings and the OD during the day. And so I went to PCO. And it was a great education. I think the US set me on the correct track, because I realized one thing about having a history of being a political activist. When people don't know you, it can be a big disadvantage, because they just think you're just another radical, and it's a fad, because often you do get people involved. What the Fulbright did for me and the education here was I could go back and influence my colleagues in optometry, be better than them clinically, because I had greater exposure, not necessarily because I'm cleverer, just that I had more exposure, and be able to push public health and push an activism, and they would listen to me. But if I went back with just the public health, given my history, it'll be, oh, there's a radical, he's back again now to cause more problems, and tell us that the profession's not doing enough. And so the studies here was phenomenal. The PhD I did through University of New South Wales, because unfortunately in a university environment you have to get the PhD. So, it was difficult because again I was very busy and whatever, but I did that, and University of New South Wales approached me and asked me if I'd bring my research into their system and do it for a PhD, which I did.
Good. And have you found advantages of the Fulbright Scholarship working internationally, or has it been more within South Africa, or what are your thoughts about that?
It's been excellent in many ways. The relationships I've built here. We now, and tonight when I do the lecture, we have a head of education in our organization, global head of education, Luigi Bellotto. He was my clinical supervisor at PCO. And during tea, he'll always tell me how he wanted more purpose in life. So I phoned him, I said, I've got a job for you. You're prepared to come to Durban and live, I'll give you that purpose. And he came. Tony DiStefano and other colleagues at PCO, we've worked together, we've published papers, I was involved in the design of the PCO Masters in Public Health course. And we've collaborated on other programs, and then there's a whole range of other collaborations that have been made. So I think the education here helped tremendously, not only in terms of content that I got in skills, but also the networks that you develop. And I do think that it's a pity that when people interpret the U.S. education in the rest of the world in optometry, they see more that there's this push to get more of ophthalmology's meat. But the reality is that the therapeutics and the stuff you're doing here, which sometimes gets positioned as a commercial battle, if you had to take that skill into the developing world, it is a much more powerful skill than even here. Because that optometrist doesn't have an ophthalmologist sometimes within 100 kilometers of where he is. And so I think the US has a lot to offer. And I'm glad I saw it from an internal perspective, because when I went back, I took a lot of the clinical training, the exposure. I had residents from PCO come and train my staff in South Africa, that kind of thing. And what we do is we are pushing to have that level of excellence in clinical training, because I think that the broader scope is a major benefit to our continent and to most of the developing world for that matter.
Well, we talked about it last night at dinner. Really, optometry is best positioned to take care of the vast majority of vision care needs on the planet. Other than surgery, optometry can really handle the whole thing, and should be. Absolutely right too. So, we've talked about how you kind of came to optometry and maybe would have chosen medicine on your own. But let's take medicine off the table. If it hadn't been optometry, what would you have ended up doing, do you think?
And I was scratching, because my third option was clinical psychology, and I don't think I have the personality to sit and listen to somebody for a long time. So I'm glad I didn't do that. But I kind of, edged my bets on those two, and psychology, honors in psychology was, because I'd done psychology in undergraduate, was like a backup plan. But having said that, part of the reason why I chose it, there were a lot of activists who have gone into psychology, and we're doing more broader socio-economic issues and bringing economics, etc. into it. So I probably would have gone that way.
Who would you say your mentors were, either growing up or at university or even now? Who would you say were the people who were influencing you to kind of be on the path that you're on now?
I think the main was my mom, in terms of the values. And the next person, most political activists say Mandela, and it's not for me. I respect him and he's my hero. But he was actually a white South African, a doctor who, by the name of Neil Agate, who together with his girlfriend went and worked with the black communities in South Africa. And he was arrested and tortured to death. And because of the kind of impact that he was making. And this is an average white South African who, like, I considered myself average because I didn't come from a political family. And when I read his story, I wanted to be a doctor, you know, because I read how much of an impact he made. And he was tortured to death because, not because he did anything illegal, but because Neil Haggart and people like that were exposing the system in a practical way, that our humanity was more important than our race and stuff like that. So yeah, he was a really big influence. He's not a very well-known South African. I mean, he's buried in Soweto, and you know, he had quite a lot of support around the time his death, but not many people talk about him. But for me, that article was a turning point in my life in terms of career choice. You know.
So he's not somebody that you actually met, but actually
No, I
just
never
his
met him.
story
He died
was
before.
great.
I was a kid when he died, and he was not much older. He was, you know, just finished university and had really given a lot to say that, you know, doctors have a bigger calling in life than just accepting the benefits of the system. And I think he was a bigger threat because he practically showed that this racial divide was a false racial divide and that our humanity was more important than stuff. And then I would rank Lou Catania as being somebody who changed my life. He's still, you know, one of the people that I hold very dear, and Tony DiStefano at PCO, and Brian Holden, who now I work with. So, you know, in later life it was them in the profession, but in the earlier life it was
And those are certainly giants within the profession. I mean, you picked some good folks, I'd say. So that's great. Tell us a little bit about your work with the International Center for Eye Care Education.
Okay, well, the International Center for Eye, which we called IC, is now called the Brian Holden Vision Institute. But just to go back, in '97, after I was back home from PCO, and the university, you know, as you know, the university salaries in Africa are not great, but they pay for you to go to a conference. So I thought, let me choose a conference in a place I've not seen, so I can have a holiday and, you know, get some added benefit of the system. And so I went through the web, found this WCO, World Council of Optometry conference in South Korea, and submitted an abstract and spoke there. And my presentation was not well received. I think at that point I was arguing for the profession to become less focused on what we do in the private sector and more focused on what we do in the public sector, and that made the argument that in Africa we were irrelevant because we were not even existing in most countries, we were not meeting people's needs, and that we were starting to face a risk that governments were looking for alternatives to optometry. And if we didn't do something quickly, we were going to lose that potential role that we had. And my suggestion was that we look at a multiple entry and exit model where we train optometric technicians who can only work in the public sector, do a refraction and eye ocular disease screening, and if they want to be an optometrist, they get more modules and go on to become a four-year British system type of optometrist who can go into independent practice. It wasn't well received, especially by the Americans, because, you know, the OD program, and given the political battles here, people were scared what the implications of that were. But in the audience was Brian Holden, and he then approached me and we had a discussion and we spoke about collaborating, and then he went home, registered IC in Australia, and then I registered IC in Africa, and we've worked together ever since. And what we did was, at that point we said, well, everybody's talking about cataracts, trachoma, all these diseases, but everybody makes an assumption that uncorrected refractive error is an insignificant problem. So we started doing research to show that uncorrected refractive error was a significant problem. I did the first WHO study in refractive error in school children, and we showed that only 20% of the children who needed glasses could afford it. And then we developed training programs. We have a couple of pillars: human resource development, service development, which is setting up clinics, social enterprise, and research. So we've now made addressing uncorrected refractive error and low vision as a main target of what we do. But within the paradigm of that, we articulate that you've got to provide a comprehensive eye exam. So, you know, but our goal is to eradicate blindness and visual impairment from uncorrected refractive error.
Which is still a huge topic, I mean, worldwide, and you're right. a lot of times the cataracts and the extraordinarily poor vision gets the attention. But when school children can't see well enough to see the board, or people can't see well enough to function, it's really something that optometry is poised and positioned to address locally.
And the agenda's caught a lot of interest. We published a paper in the Journal of Ophthalmology which showed that $269 billion in lost productivity occurs per annum as a result of people having uncorrected refractive error. And that really got a lot of people thinking because, Financial Times and people like that were calling me for comment. And I think a lot of people realize this is not an insignificant issue. It's a massive issue.
So today, IC is primarily focused on training folks both in ophthalmic technician kind of work, as well as refraction, as well as schools and colleges in Africa for optometry. What other kind of work is it doing?
Then we have, we set up eye clinics in government hospitals, mainly, sometimes outside, or in partnership with other NGOs or universities. And we often get them to take responsibility long term. So our model is to be catalytic as an organization, to start things, get a commitment from governments, state, local councils, etc., to take over that responsibility. Because I don't think that civil society can claim that we can serve people. We don't have the resources that governments have, and they should take the primary responsibility. We should push them to. And so we've been doing that. And then we also have a social enterprise strategy that's now supporting optometrists in poor countries and communities to own practices in communities where it's not viable to start off with a bank loan, for example. So we've developed a social franchise, and we've just rolling out a couple such initiatives in Pakistan right now. We have, and we also train women. We've got a program now to train women to manufacture spectacle cases that we can then use in our programs. But we'll give them a sewing machine, and we'll teach them also how to sew. I won't, somebody else will. How to sew a shirt or pants and whatever. As long as they give us our cases, they can support their families through their efforts we do. Because I think it's important that we don't see ourselves. The eyes are not the center of the universe. There's a whole person behind those eyes, and you need to be conscious of that. And then we have we do a lot of research to monitor and evaluate our work, etc. So those are the key things. But right now, the schools of optometry is the biggest investment that we have.
So if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like these vision centers really are carrying on a sustainable model. In other words, we go in, we help people get started in managing a center, or an optometrist directing a center, and then the locals have an opportunity to grow that business. Is that correct?
Absolutely. There are some challenges. We have 14 vision centers in Tanzania, and but they're in government hospitals, so we have to negotiate with government to allow us to handle it. They're okay with the NGO owning it, but they're not too okay about an individual optometrist. And we're trying to say to them, look, you need to give your local optometrist a chance to own this, because I think for us to own it, you spend a lot of time on administration. A lot of money and time on administration. And I really think that civil society organizations should be using the majority of our money to get to the people it's intended for. We take hard-earned money from donors. We should be giving them good bang for their buck, and so that's the strategy.
I think it's a great strategy. Well, tell us a little bit about the African Vision of Research Institute.
I was at a conference at an expert technical committee on eye research and blindness prevention at Geneva in the World Health Organization. There was about 20 of us in the room. And there was tons of research from Africa, mainly from Africa, presented by people from all over the world. But there was hardly any Africans who were authors or co-authors of those publications. And I asked the question with my big mouth, asked the question, so you mean Africans contributed, they never did anything intellectual? And when you start asking the question, you realize there was contribution. But sometimes, the culture is that you take the data and you go back home and write, And I'm a big supporter of collaboration, but I think any collaboration must empower locals, whether it's in Africa or whether it's here. We are now initiating programs where we partner with Americans and we make sure they get a good return for their time and whatever. And so in order to address that, I went back home and spoke to the dean at my university and the vice president, head of research, and I set up the African Vision Research Institute. And we now, the main thing we do is we train African researchers, both ophthalmology and optometry. So we take one person from each academic department, both in optometry and ophthalmology, train them, and then make sure that we get scholarships for PhD, or we do biostatistics courses, research methodology courses, etc. Build the capacity, and then we also look for funding to develop collaborative research projects. And we've done we now have covered probably about 6 institutions, or 10 institutions now. 6 of them get significant funding, and the balance get less funding. And then we have 22 masters and PhD students who we give scholarships through. And again, we're building capacity in these various countries. And these people will become the future collaborators even for our work, or they'll become the future leaders of the academic departments. And a lot of the people some of the people who was even in that room when I raised the question about recognizing Africans are my very good friends today. And they are now the beneficiaries of this, because they now are getting excellent collaborators, getting much better return, and due recognition to everyone. So I think it's become a win-win situation. We partnered with the Dublin Institute of Technology, put a research proposal through, and we won 1.6 million euros from Irish Aid. We've done another partnership, and we got 500,000 euros. We got $500,000 to create a chair position to get a senior researcher. So obviously, this is attracting attention. People are seeing the value of it, and it will build the capacity of the continent that we should have done many, many years ago.
Well, but I think many issues like colonization and those kinds of things probably stood in the way of that. And now you got an opportunity with less colonization on the continent. You got an opportunity to do it, and I think it's great.
And I must say, one of the things we do is we don't patronize Africans. If somebody gets a scholarship, don't deliver, we'll drop them like a hot potato. This is my philosophy in life, that you got to earn your keep. So, and one of the big problems, and if any one of you happen to be working in Africa, I would urge you, or in the developing world, whether it's Latin America, is that one of the biggest enemies that I feel is the patronizing attitude. NGOs coming into the continent, trying to outwit each other, offer bigger per diems or bigger this, and what you do then is you attract the wrong people. You don't attract the really hard-working, good skill. You attract the people who want a quick return, from an African country. So, we've been very tough, and, people have responded very well. Even our ophthalmology colleagues, I would read the right act to them if they don't meet their targets, and they accept it.
Certainly with the accomplishments that you've had and visiting with you and everything, it's clear that you're very driven to get certain things done. What really motivates you in life and on the projects that you're working on?
It's I think this is my values. I think I express my faith through my work. I'm not conventionally religious. I don't, I respect religions and whatever, but I express my faith through my work, and it's good enough for me. And so I think it's a harder place to be because you can't stop. If it was a hobby, you can stop. If it's central to your values, you can stop. But fortunately, I enjoy it. And I think we're getting more and more people to think that way, to join us, and that's really what drives me in many ways. I think also it's easy to be driven. I think I don't want to take too much credit unnecessarily, because I think it's easier to be driven when we see success. And we have had a good run. I often think about it because we all are fallible. And I often think about how it would have been if we were constantly battling against the tide. If some of these ideas didn't work out, or some of these efforts resulted in controversies or problems or whatever. So I think that's also been an enabling thing. success is a great thing to feel and enjoy, even though it often takes a lot of hard work. But
What guidance would you give to our profession internationally over the next few decades?
I think that we do the right thing, we don't define it correctly. I feel often optometrists are out there doing some amazing educational stuff, doing some amazing public health stuff. But the most vocal amongst us are those who talk about the politics between optometry and ophthalmology. I think what we need to be starting talking about is how relevant we are to the majority of the people in the world. You know, because if you look at what we've been able to achieve in a lot of the rest of the world, is that we've really been able to reach poor people like no other profession has done in many ways, because we're a very cheap profession to develop, you know, or cost-effective. Cheap sounds bad, because we often go and get to universities and pay our own way, right? Whereas ophthalmology is often linked to government or hospital departments. Nursing is linked in that way, and if you look at what's happening in Africa, a month ago I was at a graduation ceremony. We set up a school of optometry, and Malawi produced its first 5 optometrists, and we did that with donor funds, with a local university, and now they're going to be producing about 20 to 30 every year. You know, first time in the history that they've had these optometrists. The cost to government is minimal because we use them to establish university. So it's a kind of training model that can drive itself. So I think we need to get that message out that we're a cost-effective profession to develop, especially in the developing world. And secondly, that we're very relevant in the equation from a public health perspective. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about scope of care, rather than talking about how much we can do for people. You know, and that's been a problem. We got therapeutics from our professional board of optometry now. It's still not signed by the minister. And we argued purely from a public health perspective. We said the majority of the people don't have access, and we want the public sector hospitals to have optometrists with therapeutic services. And medical doctors who sit on the professional board, who you would have expected to have voted against it, voted with us because they couldn't argue against it. They couldn't oppose the public health and the moral argument. Yeah. But if we made it a battle between ophthalmology and optometry, we would have lost it.
What would you point to as your most significant or long-lasting accomplishment to date?
I think sitting down Brian Holden in Milan and joking with him and saying, if you don't release the budget for the schools of optometry, I'm going to make your life a misery. Over breakfast, and he laughed and said, "You're joking," and I said, "No, I'm serious." You know, because I think the schools of optometry program has just taken off in an amazing way. Mozambique, Malawi, Uganda starting, Mali, Gambia, Cameroon starting soon, Zimbabwe, Vietnam, Guyana. It's becoming a global movement, and I think for me, I'm particularly happy about that. Yeah.
Well, and that is a significant accomplishment. It really is. I mean, to have affected the development of the profession in 7, 8, 9 countries already is a pretty substantial accomplishment. What kind of life lessons about anything, doesn't have to be about optometry, would you want to share with our students and the folks that might view our video?
I think the most important thing is that, you know, when I was a political activist, I gave 2 students, female students, a lift to town before a mass meeting that was going to occur at 1 o'clock. And this was about 11 o'clock. And I asked them, "Are you going to come back to the meeting? Or how come you're leaving?" They said, "No, we just went to town to buy something and we'll be back." And the one said, "Well, we don't miss your meetings because we like your jokes." And I dropped them off in town, and I was very worried because that's all the impact I had was them. They remembered my jokes, not my values, you know. And I asked him, "So are you involved in anything?" He said, no, we just come to the meetings to support you. I think you're doing an amazing," and they spend most of the time telling me how great I was, you know. So that afternoon, when I addressed the students, I coined a phrase which kind of and I'll tell you where I'm leading to later. And it went like this, that the liberation of our people will not be attained by the immense sacrifice of a few, but by the humble sacrifices of the majority. And I've carried that lesson through my life, because I believe that when you're in leadership, or when you start something, when you believe you are the most important thing, then that's the day your organization has failed or your efforts have failed. Unless we get more optometrists, more people doing what we are doing, then I think these are no achievements. Because it's only when you get more people doing it that you'll make the broader impact that you need to do. So that's why people say, but you've achieved so much, what next? I said, no, I haven't achieved so much. Because unless we can get the average optometrist, whether he's in private practice, public sector, academic, etc., saying, in my own way, I will do something. I think that until that happens, then you don't really achieve it. Because, to make certain individuals appear important becomes often an excuse for others not to do anything. And it shouldn't be like that.
If you could redo anything in your life, what would you redo?
Get my mom back.
When did she pass?
I was 14.
It sounds like she was a pretty substantial influence in your life. What do you wish you had done more of in your life so far?
More is another question. I'm really tired of it. I bought a Harley Davidson and I want to do less so I can ride it more often, and I love speed, so I bought a friend of mine has a company that manufactures a jet ski equivalent. There's no speed limit on the dam. So I went and he gave me one at quite a reasonable rate, so I've got that as well. So I'm at this stage in my life, I'd like to do a bit more of that actually.
Good deal. And is there anything that you would wish that you had done less in your life?
I mean, I do hope, I do think in the early days that I wish we had the resources so I could have done lesser and developed more people, because especially the people close to me, like my family and all, have suffered as a result. But unfortunately, at that period, when we started, when Brian and I were doing this stuff, we just was few of us, and we didn't have the kind of resources we have now. I wish I could have done less at that point, because there were some people who supported me and paid a big price for it.
What I'd like to do now is just open up to the audience for questions, whatever you might have or want to ask. But as you can kind of tell, it's kind of an open topic type of thing, so pretty much anything's fair game. So, questions? Go ahead, Jeff.
My question was actually sort of along the lines of what you were asking. You've been such a success. Have you ever failed at anything, and what did you learn from it?
We actually failed in the current work we were doing. When we first started, we put, in fact not we, I made recommendations as to how a project, we should train people in Africa. And when we did an evaluation of the project, it was just disastrous, So we've made some mistakes along the way, but I think the important thing is not to be afraid of failures, but rather to have tools to evaluate your failures, And so that's what has happened. So it does sound very nice now, but we really messed up some things, And I think as long as if you make those mistakes, you didn't do it out of a personal reason, and you meant well, you've got to take those failures in your stride and move forward, and it's going to happen again, there's no doubt. It's less now than when we first started. We were so desperate at that point to get optometry on the agenda of the World Health Organization, the International Agency for the Prevention of Blindness. And so sometimes we rushed into programs without thinking through them properly. And those of you know Brian Olden, putting Brian Olden and I together, we were a real disaster. So fortunately now we're surrounded by and all of them are women, coincidentally, who are MBA graduates and stuff. And in fact, like the guy who heads up our social enterprise is a German person who saw my profile in some website and then came and volunteered, and then I've offered him a full-time job, and he now lives in Durban. He's a businessman. He's not an optometrist. And Sebastian, for example, if I raise an idea with him, he'll tell me, "You're joking, that won't work." You know. So I think we've now got those checks and balances in place. But in the early days we didn't, and we made some big mistakes. You know. And I think a lot of organizations, that's the value of doing some of this kind of discussions. I was surprised when you said that you was going to do this, because I'd often said to people, you know, I think we need to talk about what we've done. Don't just do the podium thing, because people don't realize how many mistakes we've made, and how others can learn more from our mistakes than our successes. You know.
Others?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about your view of the role of free market working in conjunction with the public sector to deliver health care to the poor. And we talked earlier about how public health can be overwhelmed just by the number of people. And you made the point that you have to set a distinction where some people should pay for their own. And how do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line? You know, recognizing that you have differences between the developed world and the undeveloped world, and even between different countries within the developed world. Where do you draw the line? How do you draw the line to deliver good health care?
You know, I think the collapse of the markets in the US, and before that the collapse of the wall in Eastern Europe, were actually very good occurrences, because it moved us away from the extremes of both systems. You know? And more people are starting to talk about this juncture between more socially minded initiatives and commercially minded initiatives, and that it doesn't have to be one or the other. And that middle ground is what is now many people in the world are defining as social enterprise. You know, you've got a for-profit model, you've got a not-for-profit model, and then you've got social enterprise. And social enterprise uses business strategies, run just like a business, with the same level of efficiency, but the profits are reinvested in a social mission. And that's the only difference. So for example, the Brian Alden Vision Institute is a social enterprise. We have commercial division, we generate income from the royalties of contact lens materials and through the research that we're involved in, but we take the profits of that and invest it some back into research, and a small bit of that goes into public health stuff, etc. The same applies at a micro level. You know, when you're talking about clinics, for example. I think that there are sufficient numbers of people in the developing world who can afford to pay for a pair of glasses, who can buy something that can afford to get some add-ons like a tint. And you should make a profit from it. And use that income to support your clinic and cross-subsidize other people. At the same time, I think that more people that access that market, it makes it possible for governments to look after just the poorest of the poor. Because let's be quite frank, most developing world governments are battling to cater for almost everything. You know, we've huge problems around corruption, poor infrastructure, etc. But if the pool of people dependent on government is smaller, maybe that little money that gets allocated can be used better. And I think, you know, we need to do that. At the same time, in eye care, for example, in Africa, I have had meetings with ophthalmologists. I'm the chair of the International Agency for the Prevention of Blindness for Africa, and 90% of our membership is ophthalmologists in Africa. And so I have to look after the welfare of ophthalmology as well in the continent, both from service to people, but also the ophthalmologists. And I've had discussions with ophthalmologists, and I've said to them that you guys need to develop a vibrant private sector in Africa. Because when you don't have a vibrant private sector, people go from public sector to immigration. Because it's instinctive in human beings of wanting progress. Now, what we forget is sometimes we go into these NGOs or we sit foolishly at universities and earn all small salaries, and then we say, well, you know, everybody should make that sacrifice. But that's not how the real world works. You know, I do what I do because I believe in it. I don't think I must impose that on others. And therefore, I think there is the need for that continuum of a vibrant private sector, a social enterprise strategy that looks at business market forces brought into public health, and a very much pure social kind of program by government, you know, that looks at people who are so destitute that they can't even afford anything. And I think that gambit needs to apply.
So, even in the United States, most people have access to healthcare some way or another. It's more difficult for some others to get some. But we go out and do vision screenings and tell people that they have vision problems, but then we have no follow-up to see if they actually get it cared for. You do a lot of sustainable causes. What do you think would be a better model in the U.S. for us to help those who can't help themselves, rather than doing vision screenings and telling them they need to get their eyes examined?
Look, I think a lot of the documents on health ethics have clearly stated that have been developed over time that screening without provision of services should not be done. You know, either you create that access or you do it yourself. And I think that that's really what's needed. Especially when in the US, I think when it comes to children, school IL programs should look at providing the service there. Well, we've been working with some people, organizations here, and you know, Optometry Giving Sight, which is, we were one of the partners to set up, is now funding programs in the inner city in the US because of exactly the problem. You know, poverty is not a uniquely developing world concept. It's all over. And in fact, I think it's worse to be poor in a rich country than to be poor in a poor country. Because in a rich country, people enjoy so much they forget you. You know, the systems are not geared for you. You know, so I think that you need to combine the service delivery with that, either to make sure that people get to the appropriate settings, etc. Because most of the research evidence in public health shows that most people don't go. You know, referrals are not really effective. Now, can you get a foolproof system? Having said that, you know, sometimes you can't wait for all the pieces to fall in. So you could go round the corner and say, well, can you come to OSU for it and give a referral? But if you have a plan for that pathway, at least that's better than nothing. But what I don't agree with, when you do screening and you give a letter and you're gone. Now that has also happened, so that we can feel good about ourselves. I think that's not acceptable. You must know, well, here's the subsidized program that's available, here's the number, there's a place you need to go. I think that's better than just going and doing screening and hoping that people will find it.
If I could follow up, the complication, of course, is if you go into a place and you do a screening, you have limited resources. And if you do a screening and some of the children, in this case, meet the threshold and you would say can buy materials on their own, should we tap into those limited resources we have to provide eye care? Eyewear. How do you make that distinction? Where do you draw the line? We get back to how do you use those limited resources? Either cut back from the school screenings by delivering materials to go along with the eye care, or making the determination that these people could go work themselves. How would you do that?
Well, look, I think it's a bit more complex in societies where there are people amongst them who can pay for themselves. You know, I would say people who can pay for themselves, you should make sure they pay. You know, that's the first thing. But I think those who can't, or those who cannot afford the normal rates, you need to have an option for them. You know, it's also possible to look at saying, well, you know, if we charge $1, $2 extra a year, we can produce something for the few people who don't have the money for it. Now, we always make an assumption that those numbers are high. Those numbers are not high, because I can tell you in most of the work we do in Africa, on an average day, we may get 1 or 2 people who can't afford a pair of glasses. Absolutely not. There's some people say, I can't afford that price. Make them give you $1 if they have to. You know, there has to be some contribution to it, as long as somebody's got something. Because I think people need to take responsibility for themselves, etc. And if you've got limited resources, you'd rather do a small area related well than do a big area bad. You know, go into one school, see everybody, take your staff and provide the glasses if that's a really destitute community. And that's what we do. We focus more on that. But having done that, you know, we attracted attention, and then we got funding from many years ago from USAID, but subsequently from Nissan, the car company, Nissan. And through that program, we've seen 234,000 kids in our province. So we did it properly at a small level. When Nissan approached me and they said, well, we want you to drive around and just do screening, and we'll give you this van. I said, I'll give you the names of 20 organizations. We'll gladly waste your money, but we're not one of them. And they were in absolute silence because I said, do you know, this is worth like $200,000 what we're offering you. And I said, yes, but our values are worth much more than that. And so they went into a room, had a discussion, came back and said, we'll do it your way. And today, we're growing that project. They can't stop showing off about that project because it's done. So getting the limited research to small areas, doing it well, use that as a case. You've got tons of foundations in the US. I think optometry is disgraceful in accessing foundation money. I hear from ophthalmologists who apply for refractive error money in the US to do work in poor communities. We don't. We're very good with NIH and all that research grant. But there's a lot of other money that's available that we don't do. We are now in discussion with some of our US partners saying, look, we understand you don't have the expertise. We'll partner with you and let's do it collectively. Because, some of these organizations, I know Helen Keller, for example, got huge sums of money for doing refractive error work in the US. But it's very rare for an optometry group to apply for something.
As you enter into new communities and you advance some of these concepts, what kind of obstacles that are new obstacles that you've come across?
Well, now to some extent, we're getting one or two, optometry is developing, and you're actually even getting resistance from some of those individuals, But the biggest obstacle is the people who wake up on a Sunday morning or whatever day, whatever religion they are, and decide I'll feel good about my faith by going and driving out there and doing some eye exams. Because what they do is that you develop a system. They come once in 3 years, or maybe once in their lifetime, and they give free glasses for the day and disrupt the system. And that's proving to be a major problem because eye care is very sexy. You put a glasses on somebody, you get immediate response. You remove the cataracts, but the next morning the guy is smiling. It's great for annual reports and videos and promotions and all of those things. Better than any other condition you can think of. And as a result, there are lots of organizations who are well-meaning but doing the wrong thing and actually sabotaging efforts. And we are trying to engage them regularly and say, we don't want to stop you. You can do whatever you want. Even we'll help you to get better access. But please just stop this. Just deciding what you want to do when you want, and it's only once and you're gone. That is proving to be a big problem. And the sad thing is, it's tough to argue, to fight with these people because they're all good people. They're just doing the wrong thing. Well, we had that in cataract services in my province, and the way I convinced most of the organizations, I called them together and I said, well, when government people give somebody a house who's not on the housing list, what do you call it? And I was talking to the Hindu and the Christian organizations in my province, and they said it's corruption. And I said, when you have two religious bodies waking up on a Sunday and doing cataract surgery for somebody who's not on the government waiting list, what do you call that? And they said, unfairness. And they changed. And today we have an amazing relationship. We have a coalition in our province. We have collectively raised 10 million rand, which is about $1.25 million. And we've built permanent cataract centers. And I still chair that coalition, but it's mainly these organizations that are now proliferating. And those who are seeing 5, like the Christian organization, I know we're seeing 5 patients, and now seeing more than that, because we do all the pre and the post-op as an optometry. And so everybody's realizing they can do more, and they still get their publicity, and they can say to their headquarters, and and people are under pressure. I was asked to speak at the Vatican because the Vatican hosted a session on blindness prevention. And they are sending out instructions to the Catholic diocese to engage in eye care. So people have the pressure, but we saying, and we understand that it's a good pressure. I think the church is doing the right thing, but at the same time, let us help you to do it the right way. That's all we say.
Does the fact that you are a foreigner affect your career or success either positively or negatively, and if so, how?
You mean in South Africa? Well, you know, my forefathers went there 150 years ago, so we're not really classified as foreigners. And I don't even speak an Indian language, so I feel more like a foreigner nowadays in India than anywhere else. I was chairing a session during the IPB General Assembly, and I couldn't pronounce the names. I was very embarrassed. But no, I think the good thing in much of the developing world is that in country, if we go to a country like say Tanzania, we put a lot of effort in finding a local leader, you know, a local person to lead the organization, etc. Because the issue you raised, I was very cognizant of. You know, like in Africa, people have a negative attitude now to South Africans, because South Africa is like the new colonial power in Africa, because we're better resourced than everybody else. So we come in with our telecoms companies and just take over the telecoms industry. And the locals feel like, where's our people kind of thing. So because of those things, we were very conscious when we went in. And all our country offices are run by locals. And that has worked very well for us. So when I come in more as, if I come to Tanzania, I'm more the foreigner. In South Africa, obviously I'm local, but in Tanzania I'm seen as a foreigner who did it the right way. You know, because over supper I was saying that when the students graduated in Malawi, I gave a speech at the graduation, and then after the graduation, the president's security came to me and said, "You have been summoned to State House." And when I went there, she was having lunch with the cabinet and some influential people. She asked me to sit next to her, and she said, "I called you because I really want to talk to you. You guys are doing it the right way." You know? So because, and I said to her, you know, just for my purpose, why? She said, "You've got local leadership, you're empowering our people, you're not saying, you know, we know what's better for you and we'll do it, and you're not the liberators who come and do it and then leave and stuff like that." So we have had to do consciously all that, to avoid that. But if you just go in on a camp in a country, you're not local, you do get resistance.
Would you say that's how you can assess what need is in the community? So in terms of when you're going somewhere new, it's hard to really assess what the population needs. I mean, outside of vision care, even you said you had supplemental things to do as well.
Well, you know, besides the local people, also a lot of ministries of health. I'm not talking about the politicians. They have some really hardworking people. We work with a lot of eye care coordinators, and they'll give you a good background. But you must also learn to talk to not just the eye people. You talk to the guy in charge of health systems development, or, you know, other people, chronic diseases, because diabetes falls under that, and he may have a better sense of what is needed for diabetic retinopathy than the guy with it. So we talk to those people, and you get good feedback, you know. But if you go in and you're flushing the money like the HIV people often do, because they get such good grants from Gates, etc., they offer, higher salaries than other NGOs. I think with time that system will collapse, because people see you first in terms of a material benefit, then a partner.
Others?
You know, just ask, you were mentioning that while you were a Fulbright scholar, how great an experience that was in terms of the exposure you got in your optometric training. Now that you've set up schools of optometry after the fact, do you think the North American model of optometry training is lacking anything that you've changed now in hindsight?
No, I think the quality of the training, the scope of the training is excellent. Okay. I think the public health component is weak. You know, Luke Catania himself said, "I don't think I can con you with my public health module," because he was trying to get me to come, and I like that frankness. I think the public health component is weak, and that needs to be really looked at in terms of how that gets integrated, because I do think that it often comes across as it's for some special people. You know, it needs to be more integrated and become more part of what it is. But I think the optometry training is of a very high quality. And the amount of work that students here carry and what they have to go through for optometry is unparalleled. And I'm not comparing it to the developing world, I'm comparing it to Europe and stuff like that. You know, I mean, we do a hell of a lot of stuff here, you know. I thought from the movies this was a jolly place, you know, like a fun place. And I came here to PCO and I worked like a dog, you know, and like very disappointed, you know. and I always in the movies, you know, your university had a long driveway with nice lawns and trees, and I was in inner city Philadelphia, you know, with PCO. So everything didn't work out for me from that perspective. When I got to Philadelphia, education was great. But I do think it's just phenomenal, the quality that comes out of here, you know. And I think that I argued with some Americans who were more akin to taking groups that go and do eye exams in communities and leave. And I'd argue to them, I think that's not the big contribution America can make. American optometry can make an enormous contribution through mentorship and training. So in order to prove that that is the better way, we took, with the support of Optometry Giving Site, we took an optometrist, Marianne Murphy from, sorry, I can't remember what state she's from. And she went to Tanzania, and we linked her with, she came as a volunteer, and we took her to the local clinic, the vision center that we had set up, and she trained the optometrist, she trained the local optometrist, plus she did eye exams and stuff like that. And the outcomes of that was so good that now more and more people are starting to talk that language. Most of our schools of optometry in Africa now are getting applications from Americans who want to come and do a year. You know, we got a resident trained optometrist in Malawi. And I was saying to people a couple of nights ago, when that woman leaves Malawi, Malawi is not going to be the same. Now my colleagues who didn't train in the US didn't even understand what I was talking about. Because I know that if you're a resident trained optometrist in the US, that ocular disease skills you're going to leave behind there will be so powerful, because these are optometrists that don't even have an ophthalmologist often around them. So that's really, I think, where, you know, I don't have any criticisms of the program. I think it's just been amazing. And I don't think PCO program is any unique. It's probably the same everywhere.
Well, no,
PCO would be happy I said that.
there could be a little pride here that might suggest that might not be the case. But, yeah. Other questions, thoughts? Fantastic. Dr. Naidoo, we greatly appreciate you being here with us and making the trip from South Africa and spending a little time this afternoon. We look forward to your lecture this evening and hear what you have to say tonight. So thank you so much.